Hello all, and welcome back to the YouTube channel of All Day Chess TD. Today we're going to do part number 3 of Mr. Beast versus GM Hikaru. Be sure to subscribe and like if you haven't already, and let's get straight into the fun stuff. But right before we do that, this is going to be part number 3. We're going to probably have a couple more parts after this, and then I'm planning to expand on my viewer game analysis and more. So let me know what type of content you would like and how often in the comment section below. It'll help a lot. And thanks. Now let's get into our game between Mr. Beast and GM Hikaru. This game gets even crazier, and it finishes in less than 20 moves, so stay tuned to see what happens. We've seen games in the past. We've seen some crazy ones, but I bet not as crazy as this one. Both the knights aren't there, the h7 pawn isn't there, the b7 pawn isn't there, and the pawn in front of the king is not there. So now we have to see how Hikaru survives this and finishes off Mr. Beast in 19 moves. Let's see what happens. We have d4, bishop e7, d5, trying for an early push and blocking this bishop. So here he plays d5 so that this bishop, it gets cut off. Because originally when this pawn was on d4, this bishop had lots of range. Now that the pawn went up to d5, its range is now limited, because if the bishop captures the pawn, the queen can simply capture back. So after we have d5, we have bishop c5, getting out Hikaru's bishops early. Then we have e3, c6, d takes e6, and bishop takes e6. Well, now look what happened. Now the bishop, again, has its wonderful range. So guys, this bishop gets very powerful, so you never want to have these two bishops just staring down your king side. And then we have knight f3, queen c7, knight c3, g5. Right away, what have we seen in all these games? Counterplay, and counterplay, and counterplay. So here we see Hikaru play g5 for counterplay. And he's trying to get counterplay on Mr. Beast's king side. So then we have h4, but then we have g4. Once again, counterplay. And this bishop is attacking this. And then the queen is staring down, the bishop is staring down, the pawn is here, menacing, attacking at this knight. So now we have knight h2, retreating the knight, and then rook takes h4. Look, now the position's collapsing a little bit. We have lots of different threats on pieces. And now we have queen takes g4. It's a little bit peculiar. It's very interesting. But it's still, at the end of the day, you're losing an exchange. A rook for a queen. This is not very good. Now we have rook takes g4, knight takes g4, and to stop from any rook h8 threats, we have queenside castles. So we know we can castle on the king side since it's a special move, but we can also castle on the queen side, but it's a little bit different. You see, in the white's perspective, castling kingside would mean moving the bishop first, and then castling with our king and our rook, and our king will go to g1 and our rook will come to f1. But if we castle on queenside, we can see that there's two spaces, correct? So that means we move our king to the c1 square and our rook to the d1 square. But after our bishop moves, of course. And then we have b3. I don't know, because after Hikaru's next move, bishop b4, so now we already have weakened this diagonal, and now we're again weakening a different diagonal. And then there can be threats of the queen coming in and invading. It's not good at all. Bishop d2, d5. Once again, counterplay. And then we have f4, d4, striking, and keep striking. Now he's trying to activate this rook and make sure everybody joins the party. E takes d4, rook takes d4. Now knight f2, and a brilliant sacrifice. Rook takes d2. Now the king will have to take, and this just completely dismantles with all this stuff going on. Watch. Rook h8 check. King b7. He could take this right away, but he plays this interesting rook h8 check idea first. But this is not at all good. King b7. And now, knight here. Okay, this move is horrible. Like, I'm just going to straight up say it. It's not a good move at all. Because now if the rook moves, it's a check, a discovered check. And if the rook moves anywhere, and if the queen comes in, this bishop comes in, it just gets way too hard to defend. And just like that, the game actually gets over very fast. Queen takes f4. But remember, guys, if they play knight takes d2, thinking you get the advantage, queen takes d2 is a very nice checkmate. So, if we go back, we see queen takes f4, Then we go rook d1, trying to maybe trade off the rooks, but this really does not help at all. A funny idea here is actually rook takes d1, king takes d1, and if you try and play mate, this knight's actually here, and then once takes, now white is winning. But of course Hikaru does not make that mistake, and then we have queen to e3 check, bishop e2, and the finish. Queen takes e2, check, mate. Look at this. This bishop protects this rook, this queen is protecting the rook protects the queen, and this bishop is just eyeing down this diagonal, attacking the knight and protecting the king side. Look, everyone's in the party, and that's how black delivered the checkmate, even though being down material at the very beginning. So now let's jump in to the game number 6. Okay, if you thought the last game was crazy, then prepare yourselves for this. Okay, so we have no knights. Okay. No b7 pawn, no h7 pawn, still no pawn in front of the king, and no bishop. So this is extreme crazy. And let's see what happens. We have d4, c6. Usually Hikaru would have played bishop b7, correct? But now since he has no bishop, he's playing c6 and going for counterplay. And then we have knight c3, bishop b4, straight away pinning this knight to the king. And then we have a3. Bishop a5, b4, attacking the bishop. The bishop goes back to c7, and then knight f3, developing. We have a5. Look, counterplay. This is exactly what I mean. Breaking into the center. White has 2 pawns here, so Hikaru is using his 1 pawn and attacking. You might be thinking, why is this bad? But let's say the pawn takes here, and then the bishop takes here. This pawn structure is completely ruined, and there's lots of threats on the king, knight, and stuff. It's very hard. So that's why we have b5, a4, advancing the pawn, taking control of this b3 square. Then we have bishop takes c6, d takes c6, g3. Playing to remember, what's this called? A fianchetto. Almost sounds like a cheese brand. That's how I remember it. So our idea is to go bishop g2. So then we have queen d7, bishop g2, rook a5, rook b1, f6. So this rook, later on in the endgame, if it somehow swings around and gobbles up this pawn's going to become a passed pawn, and it's going to be very hard to stop. So now we have bishop f4, hoping to trade off some pieces, but Hikaru obviously does not, so he plays bishop d8, and then rook b8. This is a really good move by Mr. Beast. I really like it. It's pinning this bishop to the king and creating some complications along the back rank. And now we have castles, rook takes d8, and rook takes d8. Then we have castles, but this time white's castling. And then we have queen e7, queen d2, queen takes a3. Uh-oh, now this, even though the valuation bar is going crazy for white, this pawn can become very hard to stop. Remember what I said earlier on. If this queen takes this pawn, or if this rook swings around and takes this pawn, then it won't be very good, and it'll be very hard to stop the pawn. That's exactly what happened. Rook b1, queen e7, g4. I think he played g4 here, maybe to go g5, h4, and start a kingside attack. Then we have a3, though. Look at it. What did I tell you? Pawn is running. Pawn started from a7, went to a5, went to a4, now a3. Then we have rook b8, rook takes b8, and bishop takes b8. Nice. We want to trade off the pieces, for sure. And then we have a2. And look, this pawn is one step away from promoting to a queen. So white is forced to take knight takes a2, rook takes a2, d5, and rook a1 check. This normally would be very bad, but thankfully there's a queen to guard the back rank, and there's a knight to guard and a bishop. So there's no back rank checkmate. And be sure to stay tuned for video on back rank checkmates and learning how to win endgames later on. Now we have knight e7, queen to d7, d takes e6. Oh no, he was so close to winning and he blew it like this. Really? We have a pin here, right? So if this pawn takes, the queen falls. There's nothing protecting the queen. And Mr. Beast takes the pawn, thinking he's gonna run this up and make another queen and destroy Hikaru. But he doesn't realize he hung his own queen. Very, very sad. We have h4, maybe trying to get something, but it's too late now. Queen takes e1, king h2, queen takes f2. Look at it, gobbling everything in its path. It's just a monster, this queen. Then we have bishop g3. Maybe he won't notice I'm attacking the queen. No. He noticed. Queen g1 check. King h3. Rook a3. Maybe some pin ideas now. So now it gets extremely complicated. Bishop d5 check. King h8. Bishop g2. Retreating. And now we have our second exchange stack of the game. Rook takes g3. If you want to be reminded, our first exchange stack was right about here when we played rook takes d8 to try and open stuff up. This one was a bit dubious, though the one played by Hikaru, rook takes g3, I understand why he might have played it. Probably to get rid of this powerful bishop and stop any ideas of queening. Now we have king takes g3, queen c5. Now look, pawn is being attacked, pawn is being attacked. It's gonna eat up everything. e4, queen e5 check first, king f3, queen c3 check, king f2, and now take the c6 pawn, which is now not guarded by this bishop. So now there's basically no way white can promote any of his pawns. And then we have g5 something, but it still doesn't work. Queen c5 check, king f3, and now takes, and takes. You win a pawn. c3, queen e5, c4, g5, trying to do threats of queen f4, and then we have c5, queen f4, king e2, queen c7, e5, maybe trying to get something, but this e5 move just leads straight to losing both their pawns. Queen takes e5, king f3, queen takes e5, king g4, king g7, bishop e4, trying to do something, king f6, king f3, and queen e5. Here's the moment where Mr. Beast resigned, unfortunately. This is very sad. Hikaru's won all of his games so far. But Mr. Beast will have some hope, and I guarantee you later on. So stay tuned for the rest of this series, and don't miss out. And be sure to subscribe, like, and do all that stuff. It really means a lot. As a bonus exclusive, we are super close to 100 subscribers. So make sure you're subscribed and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss out on any special content to come. Thanks a lot, guys, and I hope to see you in the next video.